Trump is in unprecedented political and strategic peril, directly caused by a catastrophic failure of judgment. He chose a compromised Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, and now the two men are secretly turning on each other while steering the nation through an active, chaotic war. The geopolitical landscape is fracturing in real time as we observe a massive, escalating conflict with Iran, and the strategic messaging emerging from the highest levels of the United States government is descending into utter chaos. Just 4 days into this intensive military campaign, the U.S. Secretary of War has unequivocally declared that American and Israeli forces are actively winning the war against Iran. In a sobering and aggressive briefing, the secretary confidently stated that forthcoming airstrikes will soon completely wipe out Iranian air defenses. Adding to the historical gravity of the situation, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth publicly announced a massive naval development, stating that a United States military submarine has successfully sunk an Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka. Hegseth deliberately underscored the magnitude of this operation, classifying it as the first time the United States has executed a direct torpedo strike on an enemy vessel since the conclusion of the Second World War. Yet, despite these monumental tactical and historical developments, the White House has severely struggled to articulate a consistent, rational message explaining exactly why the United States initiated this attack on Iran in the first place. President Trump and his inner circle are facing a mounting barrage of criticism for providing a constantly rotating, contradictory list of motives for starting this war, leaving the American public, lawmakers, and international observers profoundly questioning what the ultimate strategic endgame truly is. To decode this strategic confusion, we must look to experts like Andrew Miller, a former U.S. State Department official with profound expertise in Middle Eastern affairs, who currently serves as a senior fellow at the Nonpartisan Center for American Progress. Miller notes that as we enter day 5 of this conflict, the U.S. president has entirely failed to present a solid, unified case to the American people regarding his decision to go to war. The underlying motivations continually shift, reflecting an erratic pattern that Miller identifies as deeply characteristic of President Trump and his historical deployment of military force, making it exceptionally difficult to discern the administration's actual, genuine motivations. We witnessed a remarkably similar dynamic play out during the crisis in Venezuela, where Trump offered a wide, disjointed array of justifications for American intervention, only to subsequently take contradictory steps after Maduro was captured. According to Miller's analysis, it appears at a fundamental level that the president is simply infatuated with the raw use of force and the sheer overwhelming scale of American military power. The United States unequivocally possesses the most powerful military apparatus in the world, and experts note it is genuinely sad to observe that the president appears to genuinely enjoy employing this lethal force against others. While the military is undeniably a necessary instrument of self-defense, a tool of foreign policy, and a pillar of national security, it is fundamentally an instrument of last resort that one should never use lightly. Yet none of the shifting, retroactive justifications the president has offered, whether it is the urgent need to preempt a nuclear program, the desire to degrade a ballistic missile defense capacity, the goal of eliminating Iran's regional proxies, or even the ideological claim of freeing the Iranian people actually wash. In many of these specific instances, the United States is simply not capable of accomplishing these grand geopolitical goals strictly through the application of military force. And even if it were theoretically possible, the current military actions being taken are completely inconsistent with those stated long-term objectives. Because the practical outcomes of this conflict do not align with coherent U.S. interests, it has generated a deeply perplexing and dangerous situation for the American people. Citizens and foreign allies around the globe are continually asking the same desperate question regarding what the definitive conclusion of all this will actually look like. The Secretary of War offered a deeply chilling and ambiguous perspective during his morning briefing, stating ominously that Iranian leaders will have no choice but to look up to see only US and Israeli power every minute of every day until we decide it's over. When pressed on when that conclusion might arrive or what the specific measurable end goal is, the administration's answers remain profoundly and alarmingly unclear. This structural ambiguity is deeply concerning because any high-level government official, especially the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense, bears a fundamental, unwavering responsibility to explain the rationale for any action they take, supposedly on behalf of the American people. This requirement for transparency is particularly absolute when they are deploying American forces abroad, given the staggering financial costs and the sobering reality that they are placing American lives directly in harm's way. To put this failure of messaging into perspective, even the flawed and ultimately fallacious explanations provided by President George W. Bush for intervening in Iraq 23 years ago contained more internal coherence. If the premise of an imminent Iraqi nuclear threat had been true, the intervention would have been logically sound. In the current situation with Iran, however, the administration's entire rationale rests upon a fragile, collapsing house of cards. However, the foundation of this escalating global crisis goes far beyond the battlefield. It is fundamentally, at its absolute core, a story about deeply compromised judgment, specifically the documented judgment of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the deliberate, reckless judgment of President Donald Trump. Trump purposefully put his own administration and the nation in extreme peril by making a cabinet choice that every single piece of available intelligence and background information suggested was going to produce exactly the kind of cascading scandals, severe security lapses, and fatal credibility problems that are now actively manifesting. When you synthesize the complete documented sequence of events, the $50,000 hush money settlement, the serial extramarital affairs, the dark secret history at a veterans organization, the highly classified Signal app leak, the European deployment disaster, and the current toxic internal blame shifting over the Iran war, it paints a uniquely damning portrait. It reveals a defense secretary whose confirmed, verified background alone should have immediately triggered massive, disqualifying red flags, yet the Trump administration appears to have actively, consciously chosen to ignore or minimize every single one of these warnings. The most specific, legally significant, and dangerous component of this entire record involves a financial settlement meant to bury a severe allegation. In his own written answers to pre-hearing questions from a senator, Pete Hegseth explicitly and undeniably confirmed that he paid $50,000 to a woman who formally accused him of sexually assaulting her at a Republican women's conference. Although the woman reported the traumatic incident to the police and no formal charges were ultimately filed, a recently released police report outlined severe, highly disturbing allegations. According to the official documentation, the accuser reported feeling as though she had been drugged, recalled explicitly and repeatedly saying no while inside a hotel room with Hegseth, and legally alleged that he physically prevented her from leaving and was on top of her. Hegseth vehemently insists that the encounter was entirely consensual, labels the accusation as completely false, and claims he was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. But the existence of a $50,000 financial settlement, strictly bound by a legally enforceable confidentiality agreement, raises an inescapable blaring question. If you are completely clear, if the accusation is entirely fabricated, and if the police found absolutely no basis for criminal charges, why are you paying tens of thousands of dollars to make the complaint magically go away? Hegseth's own attorney provided an answer to a major newspaper stating that he settled because any public accusation would result in his immediate termination from his lucrative media job during the height of the Me Too movement, explicitly describing the entire case as a blackmail attempt. That is a truly remarkable and terrifying admission to make during a confirmation process for the Secretary of Defense, as it explicitly says to the world that this man's employer at the time viewed the mere reputational risk of a public allegation as so incredibly severe that they believed paying tens of thousands of dollars was vastly preferable to truth and transparency. Now, this exact same compromised individual serves as the Defense Secretary of the United States, possessing total, unrestricted access to the government's most sensitive, closely guarded classified intelligence. He sits in the highly secure rooms where life and death decisions about military operations are finalized, where delicate intelligence about adversary capabilities is shared, and where the most precious secrets regarding American military technology are discussed. The fundamental question that any intelligence professional, and indeed the senator assessing him, must ask regarding anyone seeking a security clearance of this magnitude is whether this exact vulnerability to public exposure makes him uniquely exploitable by foreign intelligence services. Adversary nations specifically train their intelligence operatives to weaponize exactly this type of leverage, actively hunting for officials with dark personal conduct issues, financial anomalies, and deeply buried secrets they desperately wish to keep hidden from the public. A defense official who has already succumbed to paying $50,000 to bury a sexual assault accusation under a strict confidentiality agreement perfectly matches the exact target profile foreign operatives are trained to identify, isolate, and approach. The confidentiality agreement itself represents a massive structural vulnerability, proving on paper that Hegseth possesses damaging information he has literally paid to keep quiet. Consequently, anyone who possesses this hidden information or who can credibly threaten to expose it to the world holds a devastating potential lever of control over the United States Secretary of Defense. This is a vulnerability that operates completely independently of his ideological commitments or his political loyalty to President Trump. The chilling reality that Trump's transition team apparently did not view this massive counterintelligence risk as a disqualifying factor demonstrates a profoundly broken vetting process, reflecting a set of administrative priorities that dangerously placed personal loyalty and television media credibility vastly above fundamental national security considerations. Beyond the staggering national security implications of the financial settlement, Hegseth's confirmation hearings produced one of the most extraordinary and revealing exchanges regarding personal and moral conduct in modern political history. When pressed directly and unflinchingly by a senator regarding his personal life, Hegseth was forced to acknowledge the chaotic state of his domestic affairs, admitting that at the precise time of the alleged assault incident in Monterey, he was still legally married to his second wife. Furthermore, he confessed that he had recently fathered a child with a different woman who would eventually become his third wife, and that this child was conceived while he was still actively in his second marriage. Under intense, relentless questioning under oath, Hegseth openly acknowledged that he had been unfaithful not just in one isolated relationship, but in multiple overlapping relationships simultaneously. The interrogating senator directly and forcefully challenged him on whether such a blatant history of serial infidelity and deceit was remotely compatible with leading the United States Armed Forces, a institution profoundly renowned for enforcing stringent, unyielding behavioral and moral standards for its service members. It is an institution that routinely disciplines, demotes, and dishonorably discharges standard personnel for the exact types of personal misconduct that Hegseth freely admitted to committing in his own life. Hegseth's primary hollow defense was essentially that he had sought spiritual forgiveness through his faith and maintained that his erratic behavior was firmly relegated to the past. This convenient explanation entirely failed to satisfy a Republican senator who ultimately voted against advancing his nomination, specifically citing his documented past behaviors, his multiple overlapping infidelities, and the severe sexual assault allegation as definitive, undeniable evidence of a fundamental lack of judgment that is unbecoming of anyone who would dare to lead the armed forces. While her principled vote was ultimately not enough to halt the confirmation machinery, her precise, cutting phrasing, a lack of judgment that is unbecoming, has rightly become the definitive framing through which every subsequent Hegseth disaster is evaluated. The central question remains whether this is merely a one-time mistake by a man who has genuinely reformed his character, or if it reflects a deep, immutable pattern regarding how he operates and the immense risks he casually creates. The answer to whether this is a pattern is found in a major magazine investigation that delved into what they termed Hegseth's secret history while he was leading a prominent veterans organization. This investigation adds a disturbing dimension to the narrative that extends far beyond personal moral failings. It directly touches upon his basic professional fitness and competence for his current executive role. The exhaustive investigation cited official internal documents and a detailed whistleblower report spanning the exact time Hegseth was leading that organization, alleging a multi-year documented pattern of repeated drunken incidents at professional events. The whistleblower report meticulously described Hegseth as being observed visibly inebriated at numerous official functions, including deeply embarrassing episodes, such as being totally inebriated at one specific event to the point where he required physical assistance just to safely reach his room, and being observed completely drunk in a highly public setting at another event. Furthermore, the toxicity extended to his management style, as a volunteer formally emailed the organization's top leadership to issue a stark complaint detailing an aggressively unhealthy work environment plagued by rampant promiscuity, blatant sexism, and the deeply unfair treatment of women within the organization. While Hegseth's staunch defenders and the administration predictably argue that these whistleblower accounts are disputed and categorize them as politically motivated smears, they undeniably represent a documented historical pattern of grave concern from the very colleagues who worked alongside him. These accounts raise immense, disqualifying questions regarding his basic reliability, his professional judgment, and his total lack of the extraordinary self-discipline strictly required for a role that commands the lethal force of the United States. The grim reality that this troubling professional record was widely available and apparently did not affect Trump's decision to nominate him nor the Senate's ultimately successful confirmation says something profound and broken about the vetting standards currently being applied at the highest levels of government. Once Hegseth officially bypassed the Senate and assumed his role as Secretary of Defense, his fundamental lack of judgment instantly translated into immediate catastrophic operational hazards where competence is literally a matter of life and death for American service members deployed across the globe. The sheer incompetence manifested spectacularly when a sitting member of Congress publicly revealed that military officials had accidentally added her to a group chat on the commercial messaging application Signal. Within this unsecured commercial chat environment, messages attributed directly to Hegseth explicitly laid out highly classified, detailed timelines for upcoming sensitive military strikes, including specific operational details regarding the exact sequence and precise timing of lethal attacks. The Congresswoman, utterly appalled by the breach, released screenshots of these messages to the public and scathingly describing the terrifying experience as the Trump administration literally, accidentally texting her its war plans. She vehemently and publicly blasted what she accurately termed the sheer incompetence of Hegseth and Trump's senior officials for recklessly mishandling highly classified operational information in a manner that actively endangered the lives of forward deployed troops. The very use of a commercial app like Signal for conducting this caliber of operational military discussion is, in itself, a massive firing level breach of foundational information security protocols. Classified military operational details are strictly legally mandated to be communicated exclusively through secure, heavily restricted classified systems fortified with appropriate access controls, never to be casually texted through commercial messaging apps that can be accidentally shared with unintended civilian recipients, accidentally including a member of Congress in a strike planning chat, thereby producing a situation where secret operational details are subsequently published for the world to see, represents exactly the kind of catastrophic security lapse that would instantly, permanently end the career of any standard intelligence or military professional. Yet, for Pete Hegseth, it merely produced a few days of bad news coverage while he comfortably remained in his position of immense power. This incident is not just a localized failure, it sends a highly perilous, cascading message down the entire chain of command. When the Secretary of Defense casually disregards foundational security protocols and uses inappropriate commercial channels for strike discussions, it telegraphs to every single person in the military and intelligence apparatus that information security standards are a joke at the highest levels. Organizations where the leader casually leaks war plans breed catastrophic, systemic vulnerabilities throughout a structure whose entire existential purpose involves protecting the world's most sensitive national security information. While the administration weakly attempted to dispute some characterizations of the chat, the first-hand documented account of a sitting congresswoman firmly cements this as a historic security lapse. Compounding this sheer technical incompetence is a startling revelation of geopolitical dysfunction and reckless unilateral action, as major news outlets uncovered and reported that President Trump phoned Hegseth in a state of absolute anger following a disastrous last-minute decision orchestrated by the defense secretary. Hegseth had unilaterally made the massive decision to suddenly cancel a planned, highly coordinated armored brigade rotation to a critical European ally. This deployment was not a minor administrative move. It was a foundational component of the vital deterrence posture against Russian aggression, and NATO partners and European allies had been heavily relying on it amidst ongoing regional conflicts. Hegseth executed this sweeping cancellation without any adequate consultation with his superiors, his military advisors, or the international partners involved, completely blindsiding senior officials in both Washington and Europe, and instantly triggering a massive, frantic backlash from furious lawmakers and betrayed NATO partners. In his resulting rage, Trump reportedly admonished Hegseth severely, explicitly stating that he had targeted the wrong country and that this specific European ally was absolutely not one of the nations he intended to punish over other unrelated political disagreements. Consequently, Trump was forced into the deeply embarrassing position of orchestrating an awkward, highly public reversal to clean up his defense secretary's monumental geopolitical blunder. This severe internal friction and utter lack of coordination have now actively and disastrously spilled over into the administration's handling of the massive, ongoing military conflict in the Middle East. Explosive reporting recently surfaced revealing that President Trump is actively, privately blaming Hegseth for pushing him into the most problematic and escalating aspects of the Iran conflict. This terrifying revelation creates an extraordinary, unprecedented, and deeply alarming dynamic at the absolute apex of American power. The United States Defense Secretary and the Commander-in-Chief are privately pointing fingers and shifting blame at each other over an active, bloody war that they are both simultaneously trying to publicly defend to the American people. This is the ultimate realization of the core problem, because you simply cannot effectively, safely, or successfully run a complex military operation in a volatile theater if the civilian command structure is secretly fractured, paranoid, and consumed by internal blame shifting while merely pretending to be aligned for the cameras. The soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are currently executing these dangerous operations, risking their lives on foreign soil and in hostile waters, fundamentally deserve to know that their civilian leadership is coherent, highly coordinated, and completely united in a common, rational understanding of the strategic objectives. Tragically, the heavily reported blame shifting proves that this is absolutely not the situation they are operating under. They are serving a command structure devoid of unity or competence. Ultimately, this sprawling, documented nightmare highlights exactly why Donald Trump, and not just Pete Hegseth, is the one in severe political and historical trouble. Every single scandal we have analyzed, from the disgraceful $50,000 Me Too settlement to the serial affairs, the drunken history, the terrifying signal intelligence leak, the NATO deployment fiasco, and finally to the cowardly Iran blame-shifting, stems directly from one unsingular, foundational, unavoidable reality. Trump chose this person. The administration cannot feign ignorance, as Trump explicitly knew about the financial settlement and the sordid affairs long before the formal nomination was ever submitted to the Senate. These disqualifying facts were thoroughly, legally documented in Hegseth's written questionnaire responses and were widely available in public reporting. During the confirmation process, a Republican senator explicitly warned that this background reflected a fatal lack of judgment, rendering Hegseth entirely unfit to lead the armed forces, while a Democratic combat veteran explicitly warned that Hegseth's dark personal history made him critically vulnerable to foreign intelligence blackmail, violating standard intelligence community protocols. Trump heard these warnings, he saw the evidence, and Trump confirmed him anyway. That confirmation was a profound, defining presidential judgment call, and the resulting political chaos, the terrifying national security breaches, and the ongoing operational disasters, including a defense secretary who blindly surprises his own boss, humiliates NATO allies, leaks classified war plans via text message, and is now actively feuding with the president over a live military conflict, are the direct, inevitable consequences that flow exclusively from that deeply flawed presidential judgment. Every single piece of this damning record is fully documented, and as the war with Iran continues to rage without a clear endgame, the devastating political, security, and operational consequences of ignoring those massive red flags are still actively, dangerously accumulating.